10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast, episode 336. Hey everybody, welcome back to episode 336 of the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast. So happy to have you all back, and if you're brand new to the show, welcome in. So this week we are going to do part 3 on our series of Lester Young, and we're going to talk about some things that have nothing to do with the harmonic aspects of his playing. We're going to talk all about feel, time, sound, and articulation. And that's how we're going to sort of end this series on the great Lester Young. And I think it's a great way to send you off into the world with some of these ideas floating around in your head. So before we jump into the show, just like usual, wanted to remind you that this is a listener-supported podcast, which means we don't do any advertisements on the show, and it's listeners just like you that keep the show going in the form of a small monthly donation. We do that through the Patreon platform, and in return, you do get a PDF and audio examples for every single episode that we come out with. And that means that there is a whole lot of material over there on that Patreon site. So if you want to investigate a little bit further and consider becoming a member of the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson family, please head over to our website, 10minutejazzlesson.com, click on one of the Patreon banners, and you can get yourself signed up today. We've got a bunch of new patrons this week that I want to give a shout out to. Thank you to our new $5 patrons, Philip, Rachel, Larry, Javier, Kinchin, and Cameron. Thank you all so much for signing up. And thank you to our new $3 patrons this week, Will, Jonathan, Marie, and Philip. Thank you all so much for becoming a part of the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson family. I hope you're enjoying all the materials over there. Again, if you would like to get in on this and join the over 350 people that are patrons, go to our website, 10minutejazzlesson.com, click on one of the Patreon banners, get yourself signed up, and you get instant access to every single episode that we have ever done, which is 336. That's a lot going on over there. All right, let's dive into today's episode. So in parts 1 and 2, we took a look at the harmonic aspect of Lester Young's playing. We discussed how he likes to use really simple things, and his playing is very different than bebop players, right? Where he's staying really close to, for instance, the major key or the home key, and he's using a lot of pentatonic material, and that's not a bad thing. I think that's the biggest thing I want to get across about that. That's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just a different style of playing. You've got to remember that Lester Young largely was playing before Charlie Parker came along and did the bebop thing. And I could almost guarantee that Lester Young was a major influence on Charlie Parker because he was one of the biggest names of the 1930s and 40s, and it was kind of impossible to escape his influence on the music. Now, you also have to remember that Lester Young played with the Count Basie Band for a long time, and Count Basie was based out of Kansas City. Charlie Parker also grew up in Kansas City, and famously one of the first times that he ever sat in with a band was actually with the Count Basie Band. And there's a lot that goes into this. In fact, the legend is that he kind of got laughed off of stage. He actually got kind of a cymbal thrown at him. And that was actually the impetus for him to never want to experience that feeling of getting laughed off stage ever again. And that is what sort of spurred his 12 to 15 hours a day of practicing. So there's kind of a legacy that goes back to that Count Basie orchestra, of which Lester Young was a big part of. But anyway, I'm getting off on a tangent. But I'm such a big fan of jazz history and realizing how interconnected everything was and how people were listening to each other and everybody's influences. But anyways, let's get back to the point here. So we talked about how Lester Young's harmonic language is a little bit simpler, but now I want to talk about the way that he delivered that harmonic language. And this might be one of the most iconic aspects to Lester Young's legacy, is the way in which he played the saxophone. So his sound combined with his time feel combined with his articulation style and phrasing are really, really what makes Lester Young Lester Young. So what I've done this week is I have transcribed a solo. I've transcribed Lester Young's solo, well, the first chorus of his solo on the tune Almost Like Being in Love from his recording with the Oscar Peterson Trio. And I'm going to give everybody, all the Patreon members, this transcription. And what I would like you to focus on this week is trying to sound as much like Lester as you can. Now, there are a couple of caveats here, and I want to go through kind of a checklist a little bit on how you can approach this, all right? So first of all, I want you to play along with the recording. That's very, very important, like the most important thing. Because what we're trying to do is we're trying to get all of these intangible aspects of his playing down, right? The things that I mentioned already. So if you play saxophone, the first thing I want you to really get into is the sound. Now, if you play an instrument that's not the saxophone, obviously the sound aspect is a little bit less useful, but there's going to be a bunch of other things that you can focus on besides the sound. But if you play saxophone, really, really think about trying to match Lester's sound. It's a great exercise, even if you, at the end of the day, don't really want to sound like him. It's cool to try to imitate this iconic saxophone sound, of which there's so much of his sound in other people's sounds. You can kind of trace that lineage through the years. Okay, so sound is first. Now, the second thing that I think Lester does that is completely unique to Lester is his time feel. Generally, Lester lives on the back side of the beat, especially at this tempo, which is a medium swing. And there's a reason that I chose this tempo is because when he plays over this range of tempos, 120 to 150, he really loves to lay back, like really far back on the beat. So I really want you to try to emulate his time feel. Okay, so first priority is sound. Second priority is time feel. The third thing I really want you to pay attention to is the articulation. Okay, Lester has a really, really beautiful style of articulation. It's a little soft and fluffy, and that's a great thing to have in your own playing. Okay, so sound, time feel, articulation. And when you start getting these three things really, really happening, you should be lining up with Lester almost perfectly. Like you should sound as much like him as humanly possible. And when I transcribe, I think this is the most useful thing is for whatever period of time you're spending with the transcription, you are trying to become a carbon copy of the artist, right? And there's beauty and benefit in that exercise of trying to find a place where you can be exactly like this person. Okay, that's not to say when you go out on the gig that night, you want to sound exactly like them. But in your practice, we're trying to line up perfectly with the artist. So after you can do all that and you're really starting to sound a lot like Lester, you're on the backside of the beat. You're mimicking his articulations perfectly. For sax players, you're really getting inside of his sound. The final thing that I want you to focus on this is I want you to focus on the phrasing. I want you to think about what makes Lester's phrasing so fantastic, right? I want you to look at where he's playing notes, where he's using silence. I want you to look at the rhythmic makeup of the phrases. What is he trending toward? Is he using a lot of eighth notes? Is he using a lot of triplets? Is he using a lot of quarter notes? Start to think in that fashion, and you'll really start to get into what actually makes his phrasing unique, what makes it Lester Young. And these are really the things that I want you to focus on. Okay, we know now we have some of the knowledge of what he's doing harmonically, and now we want to just try to get into his sound and the intangibles of what he's playing, and that will really benefit us. Okay, so get the transcription if you're a Patreon member, then look up the recording, just type into whatever search engine, almost like Being in Love, Lester Young with Oscar Peterson Trio, and you'll be able to find this recording. And then I want you to just get to work playing the transcription that I've done for you and using the recording to come up with all of those different aspects that we just talked about. At the end of the day, this is what is going to take everything that I've shown you this month and really make it a part of your playing. Really just do that imitation thing. Such an important thing in jazz pedagogy is imitation, right? Okay, so that's it. Let me know if you have any questions. You will find that transcription on Patreon. Remember, if you want to sign up to support the show and get all of those fantastic materials in return, you can go to our website, 10minutejazzlesson.com, click on one of the Patreon banners, get yourself signed up today. All right, hope you're having a fantastic week. Hope everybody's staying safe and healthy as always, and we will see you next week with another episode. Have a good one, everybody. Bye.